It is a common desire among Americans to set up a proper homestead in the countryside. The appeal of living off the land or living off grid certainly exists across the current political spectrum. Considering the history of European settlement in North America, this certainly isn't a new desire. Land ownership means greater autonomy and a degree of independence from external events, particularly those events that originate from the actions of man. The American is instinctually averse to crowded cities where the individual is subject to the regiments of the masses. A tyrannical rhythm all cells of the body must follow. This partially explains the disastrous urban sprawl that characterizes most American cities. Sprawl is the physical manifestation of a certain cognitive dissonance. Our cities fail to be true cities because we are cowboys pretending to be urbanites. It isn't surprising that America, which is now an imperial empire, continues the style of a democratic republic. In refusing to be one or the other, we receive the detriments of both forms without the benefits of either. The common thread that runs through America's intended system of government and the American impulse to acquire large tracts of land is a deep lack of faith in human nature. The creation of America in both idea and action was more misanthropic than is given credit for, yet it increasingly seems that humanity is the greatest threat to humanity. Most people across the world would agree we are living through a time of rapidly declining morals and values. The cause of this decline is subject to unending debate, and the contribution of America, both historically and presently, is a topic of much speculation. It is certain, however, that we live in a world that is out of balance, and we can expect things to become yet more unbalanced. From the most prominent sources of foresight, we hear dire warnings of the coming climate catastrophe, and more recently, the threat of emerging diseases. Conveniently, the solutions proposed to address these crises increase the power of the institutions that continuously push them to the front of the public's attention. There are many other causes for concern that are less acknowledged by the powerful because there is less immediate benefit in addressing them. These include empirically verifiable trends like the declining intelligence in developed countries in recent generations, and more intangible issues like the proliferation of postmodernist thought in culture and society. There seem to be many interconnected crises emerging together. I think of the attempts by historians to explain the Bronze Age collapse, or the fall of the Roman Empire, or the fall of the Mayan civilization. No single factor is entirely responsible, and there is never broad agreement on the relative importance of each factor, only that the collapse was a complicated and drawn-out process. There is a growing belief among normal people that we are living through some form of collapse. Opinions on the severity and time span vary widely. As a general sentiment, this was not very common even a decade ago. What was once considered a slump in the economy or our military might is now seen as part of a larger cycle. It's important to think in fractals. There are cycles within cycles, upturns within downturns, downturns within upturns, but the great trend does appear to be towards decline. To me, the events of 2020 were a stark indication of decline. In earlier times, I hoped that science and technology could provide solutions to almost any challenge faced by humanity. Increasingly, it seems that every solution creates 10 additional problems. Until recently, I don't believe I possessed an adequate framework to plan into the far future. I vaguely had in my mind that boomer generation model of life, which continues to be followed by most in spite of how much change has occurred in just the past few years. I didn't have a clear vision, making it difficult to take steps in a definite direction. The experience of youth is having every possibility presented and no possibility chosen. I now agree with the experts, the scientists, technocrats, managers, talking heads, activists, politicians, journalists, and celebrities. We truly live in unprecedented times, and we are facing many crises. I don't believe, however, that those with the greatest power and influence have any solutions worth entertaining, especially when I consider the results of their past solutions. Perhaps it's that American distrust in human nature and human institutions. I want to create as much of a buffer between myself and those who wield earthly authority as possible. The strategy of my ancestors was to move away from the centers of the powerful and into land far from their reach. I am thankful to have been born in a place that is fairly removed from the centers of power in the United States. But as people shuffle about in response to contemporary events, I fear my native state may not remain so isolated from the powerful. The moves of my state are increasingly seen as open challenges to higher levels of power, and we may face a direct and indirect response. In addition to contemporary politics and our demographic outlook, our geography inherently makes us vulnerable and very dependent on other places. Acknowledging these facts, I am inclined to begin the process of relocation, preferably to a place with stability and security, where I can put down firm roots and start a family one day. In various online circles, the term for this is strategic relocation. It's a topic that's garnered much interest in recent years, particularly since 2020. Your environment largely determines the kind of life you can live. When relocating, in present as in times past, you must consider the character of the people living in a place already, what resources are available, and what potential hazards from nature you may be confronted with. Each person has different means and limitations, so the right move will look different accordingly. But in general, places that have law-respecting people, affordable land, ample water, low population density, and infrequent natural disasters are ideal. Despite the many issues with living in America, it is still a very large country with many places of sanctuary. I don't see moving abroad as an option for myself. My situation would not likely be better in any other developed country. Moving to a less developed country would be preemptively opting into the sort of conditions I am trying to avoid. One must also consider the reality of leaving your home and attempting to integrate into a foreign culture and people. There is an unavoidable trade-off between distance and familiarity that must be made when moving away from your point of origin. Moving within America as an American is an acceptable balance for myself and many. I've been engaged in the ongoing sort of research that often precedes major life decisions. I don't believe in following any particular formula or relying primarily on quantitative information. I've looked at countless maps and read many Wikipedia articles. I've tried to remember my conversations with people who have lived in this or that place. There are small bits of information about life on the ground that you'd only learn from speaking to a long-time resident or even a one-time tourist. I do have a spiritual belief that certain places bring about certain possibilities, and I also believe in providence, that our movements are not accidental, and those who seek guidance from above will receive it. Some of the most valuable insight is gained from actually visiting a place. This is an important step in the process of relocating. When an opportunity to travel arises, I try to make prospective locations the destination or part of the journey. I feel like I can no longer travel for the sake of leisure alone. Prospective locations are often very rural. Being from Florida, I have rarely had the opportunity to see truly spacious country. It seems like the safest places are relatively empty. Moving to these locations requires lifestyle changes that I don't think myself or others are fully aware of or prepared for. Homesteading is a common interest, and related topics such as off-grid living and prepping have had a sizable footprint on the internet from the early days. I find myself put off by much of the content online regarding these topics, Like many interest based online communities, a good portion of the available content is produced by people trying to make money. It isn't inherently bad to desire an income from content you spend time creating, but frequently the profit motivation interferes with a genuine desire to disseminate useful information. This results in lower quality content gaining the highest visibility, promoting unrealistic expectations of what bugging out entails, and often turning off sound minded people from venturing away from their current lifestyles. The worst offenders will present collapse as an apocalyptic event, where in one moment life on Earth changes from good to bad. The only way to survive the apocalypse is to perhaps live in a repurposed missile silo or a vault in the side of a mountain. You often see such exaggerated visions of collapse in media, particularly movies, series, or reality TV shows that portray the most wacky of self described preppers. These media serve the dual function of entertainment and also debasement of those who have lost faith in the long term stability of the system. As we have seen recently with the emergence of the contemporary disease, which need not be named, the world doesn't stop turning after catastrophic events. Very sudden, large scale change is actually quite rare. Even so, there is typically forewarning. Catastrophic events are preceded by observable long term trends, and these trends are ultimately most responsible for the conditions you experience in daily life. It's more likely that your electric bill will become so high you choose to avoid using electricity than for the lights to turn off one day unexpectedly and permanently, though it is better to be prepared for the latter scenario than the former. It's best to begin a transition into a more self reliant way of living as soon as you feasibly can. I approach the subject in the same way people are commonly advised to prepare for retirement. I just have a different set of expectations for the market, in the greatest sense of the word, over the span of several decades. Establishing a homestead does seem more akin to managing a portfolio of investments than it does to fighting off hordes of zombies in some post apocalyptic fiction. When seriously considering social collapse, a boring future will always be preferable to an exciting one. For those expecting violent conflict of any kind, I would wager even those scenarios are mostly uneventful based on the writings of people who have lived through wars and the like. You should avoid the temptations of romanticism when engaging in serious planning. Still, I try to imagine what life could be like many decades from now if, by God's grace, I am able to build the kind of future I believe would be fairly secure from the chaotic forces at work. My visits to the rural parts of America have been the most useful in imagining that future. In addition, some knowledge of the ways Americans have lived historically can be insightful. Having realistic expectations can help prepare our minds and souls for the tasks that lie ahead. This following image I paint with words is just an exploration. Imagine a valley containing a few small towns along the same road. There is a modest range of mountains to our north and to our south. Our road runs east to west. We have about 1,000 families in the valley, enough to warrant an elementary school and a high school. We have a volunteer-run library. Our collection grows a little each year with donated books, but few were printed within the decade. Our fire department is also run by volunteers. Only one of the fire engines is typically operational. There are several churches, and they are the main hubs of the community. About half the families are native to the valley, the other half moved here from cities and suburbs. Some moved earlier and some later. Some came from other parts of the state, and some came from across the country. The influx of people has slowed as land prices have increased. People refuse to sell. Accents vary, but values and outlook are mostly similar. Our electricity mostly comes from a nearby dam, but it's becoming increasingly unreliable and costs have risen. People who installed solar when the panels were easier to source do okay. The rest reserve power for the essentials. Wood-burning stoves are now common to see in kitchens. Gas is still the standard for heating. The biggest inconvenience when power isn't available is having to hand pump water from our wells. Food is bought in bulk when delivery trucks arrive. Dry goods and shelf-stable products are preferred. Fresh goods come from your farm or your neighbor's. Canning garden vegetables and making fruit preserves has gone from a hobby to an important way to supplement food variety throughout the year. Some people grow staple crops like corn and wheat, but it remains more practical to buy. Internet access, like other utilities, has become spotty. Email and simple websites work fine, but streaming content is practically impossible. Outside of urban areas, cell phones get terrible reception. Radio is in wide use, and CB radio has received renewed interest. Work for most people has become irregular and informal. People meet some of their material needs through cottage industry. Practical and specialized skills are highly valued. Some leave the valley to get jobs in other towns as production becomes more regional. Some jobs are seasonal or temporary. Traveling to buy, sell, and trade is common. People are cautious of outsiders. There are rumors and reports of lawlessness in urban areas and worries that this may spill into rural areas. The hunting groups have transitioned into a neighborhood watch. Roads are monitored, the law is not formal, reputation is everything. People convene regularly to discuss security. Despite apprehensions, daily life is mostly quiet and slow moving. There's ample time for contemplation. You understand the hardships people are facing elsewhere and are grateful for what you have. Distances that once seemed short now seem long. There is sparse news coming from beyond the valley, unless you're interested in hearing. You find joy in small things. You come to appreciate rest. Time doesn't seem to pass so quickly. You notice your surroundings display regular patterns. Sometimes the world seems as static as a painting. You aren't as afraid of the years passing by as you once were. The image I've described resembles the way most people have lived in the past. While the prospect of decline can be harrowing, change creates new opportunities. Those who are prepared for change in the season can look ahead without so much foreboding. There is joy in winter despite the cold, and of course, spring follows after.